This is a CBS News Special Report. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Good morning, everyone. We are coming on the air as a solemn ceremony reserved for our most distinguished citizens is about to begin. The body of former U.S. Senator Bob Dole will lie in state in the magnificent rotunda of the United States Capitol. Congressional leaders are honoring the former Republican presidential nominee, vice presidential nominee, and World War II veteran. Dole served in Congress for 36 years, 4 terms in the House, and more than 4 terms in the Senate. Dole died on Sunday at the age of 98. That prompted an outpouring of tributes from both sides of the political aisle. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell remembered Dole as a man of great character and profound patriotism. President Biden said, quote, "Though we often disagreed, he," meaning Dole, "never hesitated to work with me or other Democrats when it mattered most." Tomorrow, a funeral at the National Cathedral will be held for Dole here in Washington. Our chief White House correspondent, Nancy Cordes, is at the desk with me. Nancy, you also, as our audience well knows, covered Congress for many, many years. It strikes me in the tributes written about Senator Dole's life, he was one of those fixtures in Washington who cared about the way the wheels turned, and he wasn't content merely to watch them spin.
He wasn't, and as a result, he had a profound impact on this country based on the work that he did in that very chamber over the course of more than 3 decades, as you know, from covering him for half a decade. I mean, here is someone who saved Social Security from insolvency in the 1980s, was one of the driving forces behind the Americans with Disabilities Act. He helped to expand food stamps, school lunches. He voted for the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, at a time when it was certainly not a given that a Republican would do so. He cut taxes. He raised taxes. He cared deeply about the deficit. And as you pointed out, by the end of his tenure, he was really someone who reveled in his reputation as a deal maker, wanted to work with folks on the other side of the aisle to get things done.
A consensus builder, and it's important, I think, Nancy, to remind our audience, I did the math on this yesterday. By my count, and I could be off by 1 or 2, fewer than 30 members in Congress today served with Bob Dole when he was last in Congress in 1996. That is a very small percentage of a body of 535 members across the House and Senate. So there will be a lot of people who will talk about the urge he had to build consensus, that compromise wasn't defeat or retreat, and yet much of our politics, as you saw on Capitol Hill and as you see from your perch now at the White House, doesn't seem to move in that direction. There'll be rhetoric acknowledging this, but the behavior sometimes feels far short of that.
And what's so interesting is that over his time in Congress, he underwent an evolution that we really don't see these days. In fact, quite the opposite. He came to Congress as a young House member as quite a firebrand, a conservative, and he was known for throwing sharp darts at the other side. In fact, even Richard Nixon at times thought that he was too harsh and needed to rein it in. But over time, particularly when he was almost defeated in his bid for re-election in the Senate, he kind of decided to change course. He made a decision to do that. And that's when he started more overtly reaching across the aisle. In fact, even President Biden, when he was running against him, said, you know, I'm obviously not on his side, but I think he'd make a damn fine president.
Our congressional correspondent, Chris Van Cleve, is at the Capitol. Chris, with your indulgence, please let our audience know what they're likely to see play out in the coming minutes.
Major, right now the casket with Senator Dole is being brought inside the Capitol. From there, we will hear from a number of senators, including Senator Mitch McConnell, who was one of the 8 U.S. senators who's continuing to serve here, who served with Senator Dole. You know, Senator Dole was the Republican leader for 11 years, the only person to hold that position longer, Mitch McConnell. We will also hear from President Biden, who served alongside Bob Dole in the Senate for more than 23 years. We expect to hear them remember Dole as somebody who governed with civility and a sense of humor, things that we don't necessarily hear a lot about in Washington right now. We'll hear a lot of talk about patriotism and his perseverance, overcoming hardship, his attitude of just trying to make things work, being that deal maker. And you know, it's hard to talk about Senator Dole without talking about his World War II service, his grievous injury 39 months in hospitals recovering. And a message he carried with him from that time, a doctor told him, you need to stop thinking about what you've lost and start focusing on what you have. That played out throughout his career. We saw that with his push for the Americans with Disabilities Act. He believed people needed to be judged on what they could do, not what they could not do. Those are certainly themes that will come up today. Major.
Chris, it will be obvious as people watch, but just to remind them, let people understand what the protocols are, the rotunda, the seats, as we can see, spaced out. We're still dealing with COVID protocols for this event. True?
That's correct. This only invited guests. It's a smaller number of guests than you would have outside of the pandemic. And while he lies in state today, it will be a limited viewing. Only people that have access to the Capitol, friends and family, will be allowed to pass by the casket later. First of all, you will see the Dole family and close friends in attendance. There are several VIPs. Of course, the president and vice president are here, and top Senate leaders. House leadership as well. The family will go in first, followed by the elected officials, and then we'll have the program here. This will be a fairly quick ceremony, supposed to last under an hour.
Chris Van Cleve on the east front of the United States Capitol. Thanks so much. I want to bring in Democratic Ohio Representative Marcy Kaptur. She and the late Bob Dole worked very hard and strenuously and successfully to create the World War II Memorial here in Washington. Dole, as we have mentioned many times, and it has to be mentioned, a World War II veteran, wounded in battle. Congresswoman Kaptur, great to see you. What did the memorial mean to you, to Bob Dole, and to your working relationship?
Well, I first met him, I think, in the early 1990s. I was a young member of Congress and actually a daughter of the World War II generation. And there weren't many women in the Capitol in those days. And I had to get my bill through, the bill to create the World War II Memorial in gratitude to those who bequeathed liberty to us. And it was stalled in the Senate. Well, I didn't even know how to get over to the Senate. And I remember I went in there, and I was looking around, and I bumped into him in the cloakroom in the Senate. He was so tall. And I'm sure, looking down at this younger woman who didn't know her way around, he sort of was smiling but smirking. I wasn't one of the clerks or anything like that. I was actually a sworn member. And I asked him for help on the World War II Memorial Bill. I said, I've got to get it through the Senate. I introduced it in 1987, and it always gets stalled over here. And that began a friendship. And it wasn't so easy. It took us 17 years. But when he understood, he was part of a generation that would never ask for anything for itself. Completely unselfish generation. And I think he was stunned by the fact that this could become a reality. And then he personally became very involved. And today, as a result of that being dedicated in 2004, it took us 17 years for something the American people wanted. Over 85 million visitors have come to this memorial.
Congresswoman Kaptur, I'm glad you mentioned that hesitancy that Senator Dole and many in that generation had. I think they would say, and I remember him saying this when I covered Senator Dole, I didn't do anything that special. I did what I was asked to do, what my country needed me to do. There was no other choice but to fight to preserve democracy and the free world. Of course we were going to do that. We don't need anything showered upon us. We did what we were supposed to do. And yet, once the monument became a reality, not only would Senator Dole sometimes be at the airport to greet honor flights of veterans, he would be at the memorial itself to surprise them with his own greeting, would he not?
Oh, absolutely. That is my enduring memory of him. Now, he was a member of the 10th Mountain Division. He fought in the Italian campaign in the Apennine Mountains. That actually started on my mother's birthday, February 19th. And we had an uncle that was on the Pacific Front, one that was on the, well, actually was in D-Day in Normandy. But he was up in the mountains. Senator Dole was up in the mountains in a horrendous campaign where he was wounded trying to push the Nazis back out of the high Apennines in the middle of the winter, mud and snow and ice. It was a very hard, and that's where he was wounded by Nazi shelling. But you know, when you met him, he never talked about that with me personally. He never talked about himself. He never talked about that campaign. But it was essential to who he was and how he performed here, and that he could even be friends with this woman from the other side of the aisle, from the other chamber where he had served. So he had respect for the House. And his sense of humor was irrepressible. And I'll tell you, when the honored flights began to come in that were actually created by very patriotic Americans from the North Carolina area, he would be down there at the memorial. Senator Dole took it upon himself. You should see the veterans when they would come in from around the country, the World War II vets. He welcomed them, and they cheered. It was beautiful. Time and time and time again, thousands of Americans. For many of them, that was their last call, coming here. And he was there for them.
We can hear the emotion in your voice, Congresswoman Capter. A lot of Americans are probably feeling that same choke in their throat as they hear you tell that story. I want to go to our senior White House and political correspondent, Ed O'Keefe, at the White House. Ed, from the White House, the perspective of President Biden. He's president of the United States. He had sought and failed to achieve that office before. Senator Dole sought and failed to achieve that office. They had a long time together in the Senate. It has to be a moment of reflection for this president.
It absolutely is. Yesterday in Kansas City, he described Dole as an American giant of extraordinary courage. And on his way to the Capitol, the White House announced that the president is extending one of the only tributes a president can give to an American by 2 days now, ordering U.S. flags at government facilities and other public places to be flown now through Saturday night instead of an original proclamation that ended tonight. That's to cover the events that will play out again tomorrow here in Washington and then Saturday in his native Kansas. This president, you know, we may fail to remember sometimes or appreciate that while he is the oldest elected American president, for so long in Washington, he was the young guy. He was a 20-something when he was elected to the Senate, and outside of his children in Delaware and his friends in the Senate, that was his world. And one big member of that world was Bob Dole. They overlapped together in Congress for 24 years, and by the late 1980s, were both running for president unsuccessfully and holding prominent positions in the Senate. Biden was chairman of the Judiciary Committee. Dole was the Republican leader. And in recent days, he's reflected on a friendship, a genuine friendship he had not only with the senator, but with his wife, who also became a senator, of course, Elizabeth Dole, and a two-time cabinet secretary. It was to see Senator Dole in February that the president made one of his first real trips outside the White House as president to check in on him after his diagnosis from stage 4 lung cancer, and they had kept in touch in recent months. And you know, it will be said, and it has been said, that this really is the end of an era, and in many ways the president is one of the few links left to that time of bipartisanship and cooperation when senators could just be Joe and Bob instead of the Republican from Kansas and the Democrat from Delaware, Major.
True enough, Ed, yet we should not gloss over the reality that, as Nancy alluded to earlier, when times called for it, Bob Dole was a stout partisan. He was a party loyalist. That party loyalty extended to the 2016 campaign, when he was the only Republican presidential nominee of previous vintage to endorse Donald Trump. And when I asked him about that, he said, he's the party nominee. I'm in the Republican Party. That's the end of it for me. And he thought he could win. Now, it's also worth noting that when President Trump lost to Joe Biden, president of the United States, Dole said, Trump lost, I'm trumped out. So there was an expiration date on his support for former President Trump, but nevertheless, he was, in partisan terms for that era, about as stout a partisan as you could find.
Exactly. And in the wake of the Watergate scandal back in the 70s was part of a push to establish a lot of the election reforms that were put in place in the wake of that presidential scandal. So somebody who had come at this with an understanding in his own Senate work of the importance of elections and who wins and who loses. And as somebody who worked with Democrats pretty closely on things like, as Nancy mentioned, reforming Social Security or passing the Americans with Disabilities Act, he told the Wall Street Journal earlier this year part of the reason why he was able to work with Democrats, part of the reason why he was allowed to work with a Democratic president, even one that had defeated him, is because his caucus had the trust in him to go to the other side and cooperate and negotiate. And he acknowledged in that interview with the Journal that that's not something that necessarily exists today. If things were different, would Mitch McConnell be willing to work more often with President Biden? Probably, but that's not the Congress that exists today.
Ed O'Keefe at the White House. As you can see, congressional leaders have entered the rotunda. That is the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, entering. We have talked a couple of times, and I'll do this ever so briefly, about Bob Dole's sense of humor. He once said, after a really short, abbreviated 1980 bid for the presidency, the nomination, that campaign ended so badly, he said afterwards, I slept like a baby. I woke up every 2 hours and cried.
He also, when his performance in the vice presidential debate was panned in 1976, he joked, "I went for the jugular, my own."
Exactly. President Biden has entered the rotunda. I think we're just going to let this proceed. We'll listen and jump in as appropriate, but we're going to let this play out so you can hear the tributes coming for the late Senator Bob Dole. That is Elizabeth Dole,
Ladies and
Senator
gentlemen,
Dole's wife,
please remain
entering
standing for the
the rotunda.
invocation delivered by House Chaplain Margaret Grin-Kibbin.
Would you pray with me? Holy and eternal God, to this grand hall and from across the country, we come to this moment with deep gratitude for the life and legacy of Senator Robert Joseph Dole. We are grateful that in his selfless devotion to you and to these United States, he has revealed to us what moral and faithful service should be. As we honor his 79 years of standing up for what's right, we stand before you to offer our heartfelt prayers. We ask that the influence Senator Dole has had on countless people, leaders, neighbors, and strangers alike would not be without long-lasting fruit. In extolling Senator Dole's unequaled integrity, disarming humor, and deep compassion, may we be inspired to reach into the depths of our own small-town virtues or our big city bravado to emulate this plain-spoken statesman, this decorated war hero, this, your humble servant. We commend this tribute to you that you would enable us to find just the right words to honor this righteous man, that you would encourage us to imitate this inspiring servant, that you would equip us to carry forth with the faith of this faithful leader. We pray this in the strength of your name. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Mitch McConnell, Republican leader of the United States Senate.
On April 14th, 1969, Senator Bob Dole delivered his first floor speech. He said, quote, "The task ahead is monumental." And this was before Bob knew he'd end up leading a conference of 53 senators. Years later, after he had become leader, Bob described his Senate management challenges with his trademark wit. "If I'd known," he said, "we were going to win control of the Senate, we'd have run better candidates." I swear, Bob could have made it as a stand-up comic. But in that maiden speech, Bob was earnest. He was already championing a signature cause, helping Americans with disabilities. "The task ahead is monumental," he said, "but I'm confident that there are forces in America ready and willing to meet the challenge." Bob Dole himself was certainly proof of that. That maiden speech came 24 years to the day after he sustained his combat wounds in Italy. Bob had already risen to a monumental task. He'd taken the fight to the Nazis, and he'd nearly paid for it with his life. Through all his decades in public service, Bob Dole knew exactly where he came from. A son of Dust Bowl hardship, who was laser-focused on food security and rural issues. A wounded warrior who spent decades carrying fellow veterans and Americans with disabilities on his shoulders. Bob was the last of the greatest generation to run for president, but he was never stuck in the past. His roots ran deep. but he was always looking to new horizons. From that first speech, through his years in leadership, through Bob's incredibly active retirement in name only, he built brighter futures for millions. Bob was blessed with long life to watch this legacy take effect. But that was no accident. Bob liked to joke that he planned for longevity by closely studying our most senior colleagues. He had a whole comedy routine about how he had tried to copy Strom Thurmond's eating habits. If Strom takes a shrimp, I take a shrimp. If he eats a banana, I eat a banana. But the real engine behind Bob's 98 remarkable years was his love. His love for Elizabeth and for Robin, for public service, for Kansas, and for America. Today we honor the amazing life that love created. And we thank God, the source of all love, both for Bob's incredible journey here in this life and for the fact that he has entered his eternal reward in the next.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Charles E. Schumer, Majority Leader of the United States Senate.
Mr. President, Madam Vice President, Madam Speaker, Leader McConnell, Leader McCarthy, distinguished guests, dear colleagues, and most importantly, Senator Elizabeth Dole and Robin. The scriptures say that we should, quote, rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. Today, we pay tribute to a remarkable leader. Over the course of his life, knew more than his fair share of suffering, who turned that suffering into endurance, whose endurance became central to his character, and whose character, whose essential goodness, leaves us with hope. Hope that we will continue to see good men and women in this country like the one to whom we say goodbye today. To pay tribute to Senator Bob Dole is to honor someone who redefined and elevated what it means to serve country. By 21, Bob had given more of himself than most of us give in a lifetime, and then he kept going for 77 years after that. And my God, it was 77 years well spent. At 27, he was elected to state politics. A decade later, he came to Congress, followed promptly with an election to the Senate. 16 years later, Bob Dole was Majority Leader, remaining in party leadership until his final run for president in 1996. The years were well spent, however, not because of his titles, but because of what he accomplished. Today, tens of millions of Americans, veterans, the elderly, the disabled, and millions of kids across the country are better off because of Bob Dole. He never lost his roots as a principled, pragmatic Kansas Republican, and Bob never hesitated to work with Democrats to get things done. From joining Senator McGovern on federal nutrition programs, to working with my former colleague, Senator Moynihan, to protect Social Security, to helping pass the Americans with Disability Act with Senators Kennedy and Harkin. Bob Dole was a champion of those whose lives were marred by struggle, who came not from citadels of privilege, but from humble origins like his own. In his memoir, Senator Dole wrote that supporters were sometimes surprised to hear that of all his accomplishments in the Senate, reforming Social Security was his greatest pride, along with passing the ADA. I'm sure that surprises a few of us here today, but I doubt those who knew the Bob Dole of Russell, Kansas, the man whose family lived for years in their own basement, so they could rent out their house, who as county attorney had to approve his grandfather's welfare checks each month, whose recovery from war was made possible only after his hometown pooled money to pay for surgery. I imagine that those who knew this side of Bob Dole understood that no matter how high he climbed up the ranks, he never forgot the reason he entered public service. And of course, he did it all with unmistakable acerbic wit, honed and refined over the years as he worked as a soda jerk in the local drugstore. Bob and I never worked together in the Senate, but I was not spared his famous ribbing. "Don't worry, Bob. It's safe to be between me and the cameras today." In closing, I want to bring back an enduring image of Bob that took place 9 years ago, as we said goodbye to another colleague lying in this same rotunda. None of us will ever forget the strength and honor of Bob with Elizabeth at his side, standing and saluting Danny Inouye one last time. Bob used to tell the story of him and Danny recovering from war wounds at Percy Jones Army Hospital in Battle Creek, Michigan. As they recuperated, they discussed their futures, with Bob telling Danny he planned to run for local office and eventually the United States Senate. At the time, Danny had a different path in mind for himself, but like Bob's plan, ran for office and eventually was actually elected to the Senate before Bob. After Danny was sworn in, one of the first things he did was call his old friend and said, "Bob, I'm here in the Senate. Where are you?" Now, as Bob approaches the pearly gates, let us take comfort he can reunite with his old friend once again. In the meantime, let the rest of us carry on in thanksgiving and unending celebration of the life of this incredible American statesman.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the United States House of Representatives.
Good morning. Mr. President, it is a sad and official honor to join our colleagues in the leadership in welcoming you and the First Lady and the Vice President to the United States Capitol. You come as Senator Dole's longtime colleague, personal friend, and as President. And as we recognize the life and service of the Honorable Robert J. Dole. Thanks to the leaders and members of our congressional community here with us this morning, we all come to pay tribute, and on their behalf, I extend a special welcome to Senator Dole's loving and wife and dedicated partner in service, Senator Elizabeth Dole, and his dear daughter, Robin. It's sad for all of us. As Speaker of the House, it is a special source of pride for us in the House that Senator Dole began his congressional career in the House of Representatives. And it is fitting that as we gather in the Capitol Rotunda, home to American heroes memorialized in marble and bronze, to pay tribute to an extraordinary patriot. Once before we gathered here in the Rotunda in his name in 2018, it was my personal and official honor to join our colleagues in the leadership and to help bestow upon him the Congressional Gold Medal, the highest honor Congress can bestow. On that day, as we do on this sad day, we recognize Senator Dole among the pantheon of patriots, honoring his duty. He always talked about his duty to our nation with courage, dignity, and integrity. As I stand here and see his coffin on the catapult that was built for Lincoln, with that flag draped over it, I'm sure many of you here will agree. It's hard to think of anyone who was more worthy to have a flag draped over his coffin because of his great patriotism to our country. On both sides of the aisle, on both sides of the Capitol, across the country, Senator Dole was widely respected for his legendary service on the battlefields of World War II, his inspiring resilience after recovering from grievous war wounds, his principled leadership in the hallowed halls of Congress, House, and Senate, and his tireless advocacy as an elder statesman. Over the course of his storied career, he earned a reputation as a fighter for hardworking American families, a leader who could be trusted as a man of his word. Working in a bipartisan way, Senator Dole addressed hunger in America by expanding food stamps, fought for respect for people with disabilities by enshrining essential protections into the law with the ADA, again in a bipartisan way. He taught us over time and all the time to respect people for what they can do and not judge them for what they cannot. He advocated for our troops, veterans, and hidden heroes who care for them, especially alongside his beloved wife, Elizabeth. Indeed, the love, partnership, and prayerfulness that Senators Bob and Elizabeth Dole shared was a joy to behold and a blessing to all of us who know them. In recognition of his legendary career, Senator Dole received the 1997 Presidential Medal of Freedom, Mr. President, bestowed upon him by President Clinton, his electoral rival, but certain his fan. Upon receiving this medal, Senator Dole challenged us, in his words, not to question American ideals or replace them, but to act worthy of them. Senator Dole lived up to this challenge, devoting his entire life in service to the country he loved and to our cherished national values for which he fought. I remember when we were gathered here honoring President George Herbert Walker Bush, and how moved the whole nation was to see Senator Dole salute President Bush. So generous he was. So as we honor his life this morning, let us resolve to meet his challenge, but he said, to act worthy of our ideals and carry on his mission. When we in Congress gave Senator Dole the Congressional Gold Medal, in receiving it, he brought luster to the award, just as his service and sacrifice brought luster to the Congress and to the country. May it be a comfort to you, Robin, to Elizabeth, and all who love him, that so many people across the Congress, the country, in his beloved state of Kansas, that a grateful nation mourns with them and are praying for you at this sad time. May Senator Dole rest in the peace that he deserves. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Joseph R. Biden, Jr., President of the United States.
Vice President Harris, Speaker Pelosi, Majority Leader Schumer, Minority Leader McConnell, members of Congress, distinguished guests. Most importantly, Elizabeth and Robin, I know this is not easy. Thank you for letting us do this. We meet here in the very heart of American democracy, the capital of the United States of America, to receive a hero of that democracy for a final time. Robert Joseph Dole. He belongs here, in this place, in this temple of liberty and to temple to possibilities. Bob Dole loved this capital. It's where he served the nation, shaped by the figures that surround us. Washington and Jefferson, who set us on our path. Abraham Lincoln, another man who, from the heartland of the country, from whence he came. Bob's hero, Dwight David Eisenhower. Martin Luther King Jr., whom Bob helped pass legislation honoring the great civil rights leader with a federal holiday. Bob stood up and got that done. Gerald Ford, who served here and with whom Bob sought the Vice President of the United States. In a sentence, Bob belongs here. He, too, was a giant of our history. And that's not hyperbole, it's real. Of wit and grace, of principle and persistence, of courage and conviction. I had the great honor of serving with Bob, as many of you around this casket have. I served with him for 25 years. He did have great wit. They once asked him, why in God's name did he vote to continue to fund Amtrak? He said, because if he didn't, Biden would stay overnight and cause more trouble. I commuted every day. It's a true story. He was the deciding vote. Well, you know, Bob and I, like many of us here, we disagreed on a number of things, but not on any of the fundamental things. We still found a way to work together. We genuinely respected one another as colleagues and as fellow Americans. It was real. It wasn't fake. And we became great friends. And because Bob deserves a final word, I'd like to read a portion of his final message that he left to the country, that I hope we all listen to in the days and weeks, months to come. And I quote Bob Dole. I cannot pretend that I have not been a loyal champion of my party, but have always served my country best when I did it so first and foremost as an American, where we prioritize principles over party, humanity over personal legacy. When we do that, we accomplish far more as a nation. By leading with shared faith in each other, we become America at its best. He went on to say, a beacon of hope, a source of comfort in crisis, a shield against those who threaten freedom. Our nation has certainly faced periods of division, but at the end of the day, we've always found ways to come together. We can find that unity again. Then the message said, end of message. My fellow Americans, America has lost one of our greatest patriots. We may follow his wisdom, I hope, and his timeless truth. But the truth of the matter is, as divided as we are, the only way forward for democracy is unity, consensus, the only way. May we follow his wisdom and his timeless truth and reach consensus on the basic fundamental principles we all agree on. May God bless Bob Dole. May God bless America. And may God protect our troops.
Ladies and gentlemen, Staff Sergeant Ethan Green, U.S. Army Chorus, accompanied by Mrs. Joanna Zorak Green.
Yes, O God, my Father, there is no shadow of turning with thee. Thou changest not, thy compassions, they fail not. As thou hast been, thou forever wilt be. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Pardon for sin and a peace that endureth, thine own dear presence to cheer and to guide, strength for today and bright hope for tomorrow. Blessings are mine with 10,000 beside. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me.
Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the benediction, delivered by Senate Chaplain Barry C. Black.
Let us pray. Great is your faithfulness, O God, our Father. So help us to see death as you see it, not at the end, but the beginning. Not a wall, but a doorway. Not a dark road, but a path that leads to eternal light and life. Lord, we will miss the Honorable Robert Joseph Dole, but we thank you for the blessed gift of memory. May our minds and hearts be filled with the wonderful recollections of his patriotism, courage, integrity, and wit. Continue to be, for his beloved Elizabeth and precious Robin, a refuge and strength. Now bless us all and keep us. Make your face shine upon us and be gracious to us. Lift the light of your countenance upon us and give us your shalom, your peace. We pray in the name of the one who said, I am the resurrection and the life. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain at your seats until escorted to pay your respects by the Sergeants at Arms staff.
The tributes have been spoken, the requests have been paid. Bipartisan congressional leaders first, capped by the President of the United States, Joseph R. Biden. In recognition and with a bit of reverence for words that Bob Dole himself spoke on more than one occasion, you know it, I know it, the American people know it. Bob Dole was a statesman, as we see now his wife Elizabeth approach the casket. It is worth noting as we behold the grief and reverence that Elizabeth Dole pays to her departed husband. She was a figure of enormous significance in Washington, twice a cabinet secretary, transportation and labor, senator from North Carolina, a presidential candidate in her own right. And the Doles, if you like this phrase or not, were a power couple in Washington, an important, congenial, and friendly one. And they were fixtures in this city, and therefore fixtures as well in the public arena in our country. I want to bring in congressional correspondent Chris Van Cleve. Chris, two items. One, is there any way you can describe the sort of atmospherics on the Hill on this morning, and tell us what comes next?
Somber, Major. This was a man who was universally respected here on the Hill. There's been a lot of tributes this week about how things used to be, how Senator Dole represented the way Congress used to work, that ability to reach across the aisle, the civility, the humor that's been drowned out with rancor of late, it seems. So, there is a somberness. This is the passing of a legend. As President Biden said today, he belongs in this place, so it is fitting that he will spend a final night lying in state in the rotunda, the temple of democracy, as the president said. As the crowd that's here today passes through now, he will lie in state until tomorrow when he moves to the National Cathedral for his funeral. Major.
Chris Van Cleve, thank you very much. Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes has been with me at the desk throughout. Nancy, thoughts on what you heard from both leaders of the House and the Senate about this American statesman?
I'm thinking about the fact that in many ways he was an accidental politician. He became a fixture in our political lives for decades, but he wanted to be a surgeon. He was a high school athlete. He was voted best looking in his class. He had dreams of becoming a doctor, but obviously the war changed all that. His shoulder was blown apart. He lost the use of his right arm. Doctors thought for a while that he may never walk again. He was in the hospital for the better part of 3.5 years convalescing. And you heard Leader Schumer tell that very poignant story of him recovering alongside the Senator Daniel Inouye of Hawaii, and how they both decided perhaps they'd go into politics instead. And he often chafed against the confines of political expectations. You saw that most pointedly when he ran for president several times. He never really took to the strictures of modern American campaigning. In fact, sometimes he would say, look, I just stayed on message. He kind of said the quiet part out loud, but that's also what endeared him to so many of his colleagues, enabled him to get so much done in the Senate. And I think you really saw a lot of that reverence and respect in the Capitol Rotunda today.
He was the least handled of American prominent politicians I ever covered. He didn't warm to the teleprompter. He wasn't what he would call a raging ideologue. He became a Republican because most people in the congressional district for which he represented in near Russell, Kansas, were Republicans, also kind of accidental. If they'd been more Democrats than Republicans, he might have been a Democrat. One can't quite tell. It's nice to have you with us, Nancy. Thank you so very much.
Good to be with you.
Tomorrow, a funeral for Bob Dole will take place at the Washington National Cathedral. Our coverage continues on our 24-hour streaming service, CBSN. You can watch it at cbsnews.com or download our CBS News app on your cell phone or your connected TV. There will be more on your local news and tonight on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News Special Report. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Good day.
For news 24 hours a day, go to cbsnews.com.